13. Baby Girl. After Genuine was signed and we completed production on his album, I went back to Virginia. Missy and I worked on a few tracks together and we had written a song on spec called Sugar and Spice and sent it off to the label of a girl group we knew called Jigga. We didn't have very high expectations, but we did what we always did. Wrote something we loved and prayed that somebody would feel it too. The year was 1996. Missy and I were both 24 years old. When the call came in from Jomo Hankerson, I was surprised, to say the least. He said, "Aaliyah heard your track, Sugar and Spice. She wants to meet with you and Missy. We want you to come down. Meet with Barry. See if it's a good fit." I knew who Barry was. Barry Hankerson was a one-time television producer from Detroit who had quietly and under the radar built a career in music, managing artists from the Winans to Toni Braxton and R. Kelly. He was, in many ways, the antithesis of executives like Puff Daddy. He liked to keep a low profile. Everyone in the music industry knew about him. Few people actually knew him. He was also Aaliyah's uncle. Aaliyah was beautiful with a style that was all her own. She had only been 14 when she released her debut album, Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. Propelled by the sales of her first single, Back and Forth, the album went triple platinum. There had been a great deal of controversy surrounding the first album. R. Kelly was the lead producer on that album and rumor had it that he had started an affair with Aaliyah, despite the fact that she was seriously underage. Court records would later show that the two had eloped when she was just 15. Although the marriage license said she was 18. A chance to work with her was huge. I called Missy and she was amped too. "Tim, this is crazy," she said, half laughing, half screaming. "Dog, this is what we've been dreaming of. Aaliyah? I love her music." Quote, Jomo flew us to Detroit and we met with the executives on the team. Blackground Records, Jomo and Barry's label, had broken ties with Jive, which had released Aaliyah's debut. They had a new deal with Atlantic and they were looking for a whole new sound for their star artist. A few minutes into our meeting with Jomo, Aaliyah walked in. It's hard to describe it, but from the moment she entered the room, both Missy and I felt like we'd known her our entire lives. "Tim, Missy," she said. "I'm Aaliyah. It's nice to meet you both." Her smile was wide and everything about her was warm and welcoming. "I really like what you and Missy have been working on," Aaliyah said, settling into an armchair in the studio lounge. "I really want that edgy, off-center style for my next album. I don't want to play it safe." Missy and I had brought a track with us, something we thought she might like. Although usually I'm super quiet, I had no problem speaking up with Aaliyah. "We wrote you a song," I said. "Can we play it for you?" Quote, Aaliyah beamed at Jomo. "He's got tracks. He didn't come to chit-chat. He came to play music." Then she turned to me and said, "Right down to business. I like that. Let's hear it." We went into the studio and I queued up a beat that had a slow but danceable groove. Missy had already written the lyrics and recorded the vocals as a reference so Aaliyah could hear how it should sound. The song was called If Your Girl Only Knew, and from the beginning, we felt like it was a great sample for our meeting. Aaliyah might love it or hate it, but at least we would have presented a piece of music that was truly representative of our sound. The lyrics were so Missy. My grandmother used to talk about how when she was a young woman, she and all of her friends loved a book called Peyton Place because it told you, in juicy detail, all the dirty things that were happening behind the white picket fences on all of those pretty Anywhere USA, tree-lined streets. Missy's lyrics often have a similar quality. You feel like she knows what's going on behind all of the closed doors. What women say they want. What they really want and the lengths they'd go to for Mr. Right and Mr. Right Now. Aaliyah could tell right away that I wasn't going to give her the straight-up classic R&B beats. I was drawing from my catalog of sounds and in my songs. You're as likely to hear the sound of oil sizzling in a cast iron pan and the pounding of a basketball on a concrete court as you are to hear a hi-hat or a bass drum. We played If Your Girl Only Knew for Aaliyah and she loved it. So much so that halfway through the song, she got up and started dancing to the beat. Missy and I looked at each other in disbelief. So many years of the road being hard. How could it be that within a few short months of emancipating ourselves from Devante, things could be going so easily? Aaliyah stopped dancing for a moment and looked at us and said, "You two have something special and I want to be part of it." Jomo arranged to put Missy and me up in a nearby hotel and we started working on If Your Girl Only Knew right away. In the studio, Aaliyah explained what her goals for the new album were. She said, "See, this is the thing. I'm feeling really good about this second album. I feel pressure too. The label wants it to be bigger. I want it to be bigger too. I also want it to be better. I want to be challenged by all of the producers and writers who are working with me. You know what I mean?" Quote, "We did. Although we were just getting our feet wet in the industry. Missy and I had 10 years of experience working together. We pushed each other. We kept raising the bar for each other. When we started working with Aaliyah, we all recognized in each other not just a desire to stand out among the crowd but a commitment to excellence." Soon after our arrival in Detroit, Aaliyah started calling me Teddy Bear and we started calling her Baby Girl. She realized pretty quickly that all she had to do was call me by my new nickname to get me to do whatever she wanted. "Teddy Bear," she'd say, "we should stay in the studio a little longer. Knock out this song." No matter how tired I was and no matter how long we'd been there, I'd stay and work until we were ready to drop. After we were done recording If Your Girl Only Knew, we handed it to the executives at Atlantic and waited to hear their response. We'd done the one song they'd allotted to us and now there was nothing to do but wait. It was excruciating. Aaliyah was just as nervous as Missy and I were. We were having dinner in Detroit one night and Aaliyah said, "What's taking them so long? This song has to make the album. And it should be a single. Maybe even the first single." Missy and I were afraid to get our hopes up. "Let's not get carried away," Missy said. "The beat is sick. We know that. But it's so different from what's on the radio right now. Maybe the label won't be ready." Aaliyah shook her head. "They'll pick it. I know it. I'll insist on it." I just smiled. The way Aaliyah was willing to go to bat for us was astounding. I felt like I'd known her for years. Not just weeks. Twyla Tharp, the choreographer who has worked with some of the most creative people in the world, from Mikhail Baryshnikov and David Byrne to people like Billy Joel and James Brooks, believes that all collaborations are love stories. I've produced work now for literally hundreds of artists and I know this to be true. When the work works, when I break out my catalog of sound and an artist brings her or his true spirit to the studio, it is a love story. Sometimes it's Romeo and Juliet. Sometimes it's Captain Ahab and Moby Dick. Sometimes it's Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler. Sometimes it's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And sometimes, like in the case of me, Aaliyah and Missy, it's like that old Sly and the Family Stone song says, a family affair. The next day Barry called to say, "We love this song. It's gonna be a single. Ready to start working on another track?" Quote, I was ready for more. And next up would be a song we called, "Are You That Somebody?" I used a sample of a baby cooing from an old electronica classic, a Perry and Kingsley track from the 1960s called "Countdown at 6 Inches." Because Aaliyah had already started feeling like family to us, which is why we called her Baby Girl, and you can hear it on the album when I come on with my rap. The hook on "Are You That Somebody?" was so simple. Are you that somebody? Because I really need somebody. But Aaliyah's delivery made it a classic. It's a song that lives on and on. One that has been sampled and referenced by everyone from Drake and Lil Wayne to Australian artist Godier to Banks, who did an acoustic version of the song on the BBC. The summer of 1996, Aaliyah dropped her sophomore album, 1 in a Million. The record was everywhere. It went triple platinum in the US and sold over 8 million copies worldwide. Aaliyah often spoke of the album as being her Control, the album that Janet Jackson had made when she was around the same age. That album had established Janet's independence and creativity in a way that set the stage for a stunning career. No small feat when your brothers are musical legends. Aaliyah had grown up listening to Control in much the same way that I had been weaned on Rick James and Prince. Aaliyah spoke of her desire to record with her idol whenever a microphone was thrust into her face. And Janet had gone on record saying that she would welcome the opportunity to record with Baby Girl, too. She was so young and yet she changed the face of R&B music. She was an urban girl but she had a lot of mystery to her. You could never pigeonhole her. From the way her hair swooped over her eye to the giant sunglasses to her oversized jackets that revealed her rock-hard abs. The music industry had never seen anything like it. The spring after 1 in a Million became such a massive hit. She graduated from the Detroit School for the Fine and Performing Arts. Then she recorded the title song for Fox's animated film Anastasia. The song was nominated for an Oscar and she became the youngest singer to ever perform at the Academy Awards. But she wasn't about to become a typical Disney-like princess. The next year she made a movie with Jet Li, a modern-day retelling of Romeo and Juliet called Romeo Must Die. And then after rocking it out in a martial arts movie, she went over to the dark side, playing an ancient vampire queen in Anne Rice's Queen of the Damned. She had the superstar shine of Beyoncé, the rock and roll edge of Rihanna and a style that was entirely her own. Everything she did was new and had never been done by a teenage girl of any color in the industry before. She had all the talent, but what she had above and beyond anything was an instinct for choosing the right projects. An instinct for transforming herself, and a curiosity that made her say yes. Why not? In an industry known for playing it safe and profiting from giving the people the same thing again and again and again. Aaliyah, with her sweet, sultry soprano, was like a piece of the puzzle that we didn't even know was missing. Like Missy, she loved the language of real women. She loved the playfulness and the seduction, the secrets and the scandals that made love so rich and so real. Like me, she loved listening to the world. She had a particular appreciation for all of the sounds that I brought onto a track and the way I mixed them together. Sometimes, when we were working on a song in a studio, it was like the music was a snow globe that we'd shaken up. The raindrops and the vocal melodies, the whistles and the hand claps, the talk boxes and the beatboxes, the world and sound swirling around our heads as our souls looked on in wonder. 14. Jigga what? Our work with Aaliyah led to more producing opportunities. But in the back of my mind, I started thinking about doing something more personal. I've never claimed to be a rapper's rapper, but I can do a little something on the mic. I decided my solo album would actually be more like a compilation album of all of my favorite artists at the time. In 1998 I dropped my first solo album, Tim's Bio, live from Da Basement, a nod to my days with the Da Basement crew. I was 26 years old and had just begun to develop my friendship with Jay-Z. So I was thrilled when he agreed to do a track called Lobster and Scrimp, a playful ode to the good life. Static, who was my co-writer on Pony, appeared on a few tracks. And I brought in Kelly Price, a new vocalist with an amazing voice. And of course, I had my family with me. Missy, Aaliyah and Genuine all generously contributed tracks as well. I had heard a young rapper on the radio in Atlanta, so I invited him to rhyme on the album too. That youngin' was Ludacris, and he would go on to have a multi-platinum career of his own. I'm proud to say that I was the first person to put him on a record. I'll be honest, I was disappointed when Tim's bio didn't top the charts or rack up millions in sales. But I'm a creative person. My job is to make music. Constantly. You can't do everything for the money. You sure as hell can't do it all for the fame or the praise. Sometimes you write a song or make a beat because it feels good and it makes you smile. Maybe the thing you wrote that didn't sell sets the musical groundwork for an idea that you develop later. Sometimes it's the later thing that explodes. And even though the critics rarely connect the dots, you start to understand. There was no way for you to get to point C without getting to point A and point B first. My journey is my own. And as long as I'm learning and doing new things, then I'm growing. And as long as I am growing, I'm good. Once I got done with my solo project, it was time to get Missy ready for her sophomore album. I already know what I'm calling this album, Missy said the minute we got into the studio. Lay it on me, I said. She's a bitch, Missy said. Are you serious? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You're not serious. Missy spun around in her chair. I could tell she was a ball of nervous energy. I'm dead serious. Tim. I wrote the lyrics to a song called, She's a Bitch, and I want the album to have the same name. Cue up some beats so I can spit the song for you. I played a simple beat and Missy started rhyming for me. I could tell that she was going for a darker, more raunchy style than her first album. Supa Dupa Fly was all about being laid back and playful. We were just so happy to be making a bona fide Missy Elliott joint. This time around, there was pressure. People would want to know if we could reproduce the magic. We hadn't even started working and I could tell the pressure was getting to Missy. I could hear it in her lyrics and her delivery. She was stressing. I stopped the beat. Missy, relax. Forget about the last album. How can I forget? Missy said, cutting her eyes at me. No one at the label will let me forget. I looked around the studio. No one from the label is here. It's just you and me. We're about to do what we always do. Make good music. If people like it, great. If not, oh well, and on to the next. Missy wasn't comforted. That's just it, she said. If this album doesn't do well, there might not be a third. I keep hearing about artists who got cut off the roster because of a sophomore slump. I sighed. Her energy was so different from what I'd been expecting to work with that day. I wasn't expecting all of the stress and I was still relatively new to the game. As a producer with a growing string of hits under my belt, my brand didn't depend on the fate of one album. But Missy was both a writer and a producer and an artist. I know she valued her work as a singer and a rapper just as much as she valued her work behind the scenes. The pressures on her were different and I had to recognize that. I got up and sat next to her. It's not that I don't get the pressure. I see it, I feel it, but you're going to kill your creativity if you keep dwelling on the label, the critics and the sales. Let's just focus on how far we've come, how lucky we are and how much we love to make music. Missy smiled. You're right. You are so right. I could feel her energy and optimism bubbling up. She shook it off and we got back to work. I created a slow, haunting beat for a song Missy wrote called, All in My Grill. We layered it with vocals by a singer called Nicole Ray. In the original, we had Big Boy from Outkast spit a rhyme. The European version featured a French rapper named MC Solar. It was so crazy how that little song went all around the world. Boy George remixed the single for the UK. Missy and I remembered being kids and dancing around to songs like Karma Chameleon. Now he was remixing our tracks. Unbelievable. As close as Missy and I were, we didn't talk about our relationships very often. In a lot of ways we were like an old married couple. The music was our baby. Minding that baby, raising that baby, was more than a full-time job. So when Missy came in with the lyrics for a song called Crazy Feelings, I had to take a step back. She didn't just have the nervous energy of doing her second album. She'd been through something, put her feelings out there and gotten her heart stomped for the effort. We wanted a vocalist with true chops to join Missy on the album. So we reached out to Beyoncé. At the time, the Queen Bey was just 18 years old but already on her way to making girl group history with Destiny's Child. The day she came to the studio we were both struck by how poised she was. She arrived early, not just on time. She was soft-spoken and kept to herself. But when it was time for her to sing, she blew the house down. I like the way this is coming together, Missy said when we were finishing up the album. Of course, I said. You know how well we work together. But we have to finish soon, she said, looking worried. Elektra keeps hounding me to hand in the album. We spoiled them, I said. Gave them the first album in 2 weeks. What were we thinking? Missy and I both laughed about how quickly Supa Dupa Fly had come together. But the reality was that album was like something that had been growing inside of us for years. From my bedroom in Virginia Beach to Devontae's basement to the Detroit studio where we made magic. With Aaliyah, that's why I say you can never judge an artist at first blush. There's no way to know, until you get in the studio, what she has inside of her. All the ways that life has been grooming her and growing her for the moment you're about to record. On wax. One afternoon I was working on Missy's album when Jay-Z dropped by the studio. Since the success of Jigga, we had kicked it from time to time. When he came in, I was parked at the mixing board. "Tim, you gonna kill yourself, man," he said, smiling. "All this work. Let me take you to Atlantic City or something." I shook my head. "A closed mouth don't get fed, bro." He pulled up a chair. "Okay, then let me hear what you got. Some of that top secret shit." I played several tracks for him. Jay nodded his head. He seemed to like what he heard. Sometimes he'd give a brief comment. Let me know what he liked more than other things. As usual, I had this one beat that I just couldn't get a grip on. I'd been playing with a sample called Kasara Kasara, a beautiful Egyptian melody performed by a famous singer named Abdul Halim Hafez, who was like the Frank Sinatra of Arab music. I couldn't find the right flow to match what was going on in the song. I had flutes whistling a melody and I was ratcheting that against a bounce bass line. But it was hard to wrangle. At the moment that Jay was in the studio, the track was playing me, not the other way around. I figured if anyone could tame this beat, it would be Jay, so I played it for him. I could tell that he liked it because he stood up to listen to it. When I was done, he asked, "Yo, what are your plans for this one?" I shrugged, still thinking on it. "I dig it but I don't know what to do with it." Jay said, "You need to give it to me. Dog, I need this. I could do something with this." Jay was one of those artists who always raised the level. If he heard something in a track, he was going to put some heat on it. When I looked at him, he had that faraway look in his eye like he was already writing the song in his head. "You got something?" I asked. "Already?" Jay just smiled and made his way into the booth, gesturing to the engineer to cue up the beat. Within hours, the song was done and we were mastering the track. I was sitting at the board, a grin on my face, singing along with Jay as we played back his vocals. Jay-Z nailed it. He always does. He has this God-given ability to find the appropriate flow to ride over any beat. Then we brought in Bun B and Pimp C, known collectively as UGK, in to round out the track. The way their southern drawl floated over that Egyptian-inspired beat just blew my mind. It felt all kinds of right. Jay-Z called the song Big Pimpin', but he could have titled it anything and it would have been perfect. That song went on to become the most successful single on Jay's album Volume 3. Life and Times of S. Carter. It was number 1 on the Top 40 chart and Rolling Stone named it to their list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. Later, when Jay was working on his book, Decoded, he expressed some regret about the lyrics to the song. He said, "Some lyrics become really profound when you see them in writing. Not Big Pimpin', that's the exception." It was like, I can't believe I said that. And kept saying it. What kind of animal would say this sort of thing? Reading it is really harsh. Honestly, it just makes me admire him even more. Making records is all about the moment. You make a beat, you write a rhyme, you capture that moment in time and it's a letter in a bottle. Sometimes, years later, you go back and you play a track and it's like reading the diary of a you that you can barely remember. Doesn't mean that the old you was bad or someone to be ashamed of. Thank God we have our music. For a whole generation of artists. From Jay and Beyonce to me, Missy and Genuine, we've got this exquisite vault of music that captures who we were and how we felt. It's like those pencil nicks on the kitchen wall that your parents make to show how tall you're getting. Our nicks have beats and melodies. But it's the same thing. They show us how much we've grown. 15. Are You That Somebody? The title of the song, Try Again, which we wrote for Aaliyah, is ironic, because I couldn't stop fiddling with the bass line. It was in my head so much that I actually began to dream about it. There was something nagging at me that I couldn't quite work out. Aaliyah told me to chill. Missy begged me to stop overthinking it, but I couldn't let it go. Finally, I relented. After all, just as Aaliyah sang in the song, if at first you don't succeed, dust yourself off and try again. It was 2000, the start of not just a new year but a new century. Aaliyah had just landed her first big movie role, opposite action star Jet Li in Romeo Must Die. She was only 21 but baby girl had so much talent that she'd talked her way into being executive producer of the film's soundtrack. I started the track by quoting the opening lines to Eric B. and Rakim's I Know You Got Soul. It's been a long time since I left you, without a dope beat to step to. Then I introed Aaliyah by literally calling her onto the track. Baby Girl. Khalifa Sana in the New York Times wrote that on the song. Aaliyah seems to be playing a game with the bass line, matching its swells and fades, twists and turns. He also wrote that Try Again helped smuggle the innovative techniques of electronic dance music onto the American pop charts, and it established Aaliyah as pop music's most futuristic star. In many ways that song epitomized all the things Missy and I were striving to do in our music. We wanted to make music that felt both instantly familiar but also one step ahead. The listening public responded immediately. Try Again became the first song to hit the top of the Billboard Top 100 based solely on radio airplay. Aaliyah was nominated for a Grammy and she won 2 MTV Video Music Awards for the video. Baby Girl was shining bright and all of us were benefiting from her light. There were 2 things I learned about the whole Try Again ordeal. You have to keep people around that you trust to tell you to let go. Also, sometimes it's good to be wrong. I was overthinking the track to the point of obsessing. Surely, I could have scrapped it and moved on with other songs. Maybe I would have tinkered with it and made some improvements. Or maybe not. In the end it was perfect because it was imperfect. I learned so much working with Aaliyah. But one of the most important things was to trust the organic nature of the process. Barry Hankerson, Aaliyah's uncle, introduced me to Jimmy Iovine at Interscope. I respected what Barry had done with his own label, Blackground, and I was thinking maybe the time was right for me to start a label of my own. Jimmy and I met and discussed the foundations of what would become Beat Club. The money was literally pouring in. If I weren't cashing every check and monitoring every royalty statement, I would have thought someone was counterfeiting bills and filling my bank account. It was that much loot. The flow was that steady. But the funds were legit, and for the first time in my life, I could spend without hesitation. I was 28 years old. I had been dating a girl named Angela from back in Virginia Beach, and I bought her tons of stuff. I started becoming a regular customer of Jacob Arabo, aka Jacob the Jeweler, who was the go-to guy for bling in the hip-hop world. As Jay-Z rapped in Girl's Best Friend, I took you out of Jacob in clusters. Busters, they wanted to rush us. Love the way you sparkle when the sun touch ya. But what really got me excited were the cars. I went all out, picking out cars like a kid picks out ice cream flavors. At one point, I had a Mercedes CLK, a Benz CL600, a Ferrari F430 and a Lamborghini convertible. Every other month, I bought a new car. I bought a house in Virginia Beach. I bought a house for my mother. I had everything I could have possibly wanted. I wasn't saving much, but I was enjoying spending and being able to do for my family and the people I loved. My mother was still my rock and one of my biggest supporters. We talked a lot about my success and what it meant. She was happy to see that the little boy whose prized possession was a Fisher-Price record player was now making music that he loved. But she also had her concerns. Tim, she said to me one afternoon, you know you can only drive one car at a time. I know, Ma, I said cheekily. And I do drive one car at a time. One on Monday, one on Tuesday. You feel me? Quote. She laughed at that one, but she wasn't going to let me off the hook just yet. Don't forget who you are. Tim, she said, you don't need all these things to be happy. When you were young and we didn't have much, you held on to your music and the music gave you joy. Now your hard work is paying off. Just don't lose track of you. I thought about what she said a lot in the days after our conversation. If I didn't listen to my mother, who had never steered me wrong, who could I listen to? It was fun to shop and spend. But how much of what she said was true? When was it all just too much? When I got that insurance bill for $60,000, I realized that yes, I was in fact spending too much. Some of those whips had to go. $60K on car insurance? Nah, that was a beat I just couldn't clap to. Unjustifiable. In an effort to tone down my lifestyle a little bit, I decided that I would buy a Cadillac Escalade and make that my everyday ride. I was prepared to pay cash for the car. I already knew where to take it to get the sound system right, and there was a guy on standby, ready to lace the car with some 22-inch chrome wheels. I walked into the dealership and it was as if I were invisible. Not a single person made a move to help me. Even after I looked at several cars with interest, any time I tried to make eye contact with someone, they looked away. One woman on the sales floor was openly ignoring me. I could tell that she was assuming I was just looking. Little did she know, I could have purchased every car on that lot. I grew up in the South, so I'm no stranger to racism. But in this day and age, I naively thought things might be different. Finally, the woman on the floor spoke to me grudgingly. Can I help you? She asked. Yes, I'm looking for a new truck. I paused. The one I had been checking out before she approached me was kind of fly. Actually, can I test drive this one? Quote, test drive? She repeated it as if the words were in a foreign language she didn't understand. Yes, I said. I want to test drive this one right here. See if I like it. She looked me up and down and said, you want to test drive this car? Quote, I was starting to get impatient, but I kept my tone even. Yes, I said. Is there a problem? She hesitated, then said, well, we don't really have anyone to go on a drive right now. I looked around. It was a weekday morning and the floor was buzzing with employees. Salespeople were chatting it up and chilling. I looked at the crowd of people by the coffee machine, then looked back at her. She seemed to be daring me to disagree with her. Her non-existent lips were firmly pressed together. Can I speak to your manager? I asked. Now she was bothered. I don't see why that's necessary, she said, her voice getting shrill. Not a hard thing to do to find him or her myself, I said, walking past her. She said, okay, 1 minute, and then she disappeared into one of the rear offices. A few minutes later, the manager came out to talk to me. He seemed like an okay dude, but I had already decided they weren't getting my money. It was the principle of the thing. I was prepared to purchase one of your vehicles today. In cash, I told the manager. His eyes widened and he tried to usher me into his office. By all means, let me take you on a test drive myself, he said apologetically. We can try any of the vehicles you want. I smiled and shook my head. No, thank you, I said. Your employee lost this sale. She willfully ignored me on the floor, and when I finally got her attention, she told me no one was available for a test drive, which is clearly not true. So I am taking my business where it will be respected. Excuse me, sir, he said. I'll be right back. I could hear him loudly whispering at the woman who had treated me so poorly. Then he came back and he said, what can we do to save this sale? Absolutely nothing, I said, walking out of the dealership. As I got into my car, I could see through the window that the manager was now openly screaming at the woman. I hope that he fired her, because honestly, I think that's the only way someone like her would ever learn. But that wasn't my concern. I had stood up for myself. By August 2001, I began to get caught up in the hip-hop lifestyle. One time I rented a villa in Cancun. There were so many beautiful black women there. Jay-Z came through. Jermaine Dupri was one of my guests. And I'll admit it, I was acting like a hoe. I had been dating Angela on and off for a few years when we decided to get married. I'm willing to admit, I wasn't always faithful, but I was ready to put aside the whole player thing and settle down. My parents adored her. My friends and my family were all in favor. But as we started to address the wedding invitations, something was gnawing at me. You sure you want to do this? I asked Angela. I tried to make my voice light, but Angela knew me well enough that she bolted upright in her chair and gave me the look. Why would I be unsure? She asked. I don't know. Wait, she said, clutching a cream-colored envelope in her hand. Are you not sure? Who says I'm not sure? Angela went back to addressing envelopes. But she kept giving me the side eye, and it was not like I didn't deserve it. I had questions. Was I ready to get married? Did I have what it took to be a good husband? And just as importantly, did Angela have what it took to be a good wife? There was a part of me that wondered whether Angela loved Timothy Mosley, the chubby shy guy from Virginia Beach, or was infatuated with Timbaland, a producer with millions of dollars in the bank and a slew of hit records under his belt. When you're in the spotlight and you're starting to accumulate serious wealth, you begin to wonder what people's motives are. Angela hadn't been around before the money. Would she be around if there were no money? I wasn't sure. These questions had more to do with my uncertainty than they had to do with her intentions and good character. I loved her. She was sweet, caring, and a genuinely impressive woman. So I put my doubts aside and moved forward with our plans to marry. I told myself, you can't call it off when the invites are already in the mail. So I moved forward. I bought my tux. I got my groomsmen together and I got ready to jump the broom. But first I had to finish up a recording session. I was at the board in New York when a friend brought a young woman named Nia into the studio to hang out. It wasn't unusual for people to hang out at the studio while I was working. Making music is a social business, and you never know when a surprise drop-in might lead to a hit song. Like when Jay swung by and we ended up recording Big Pimpin'. Often the girls who come around have a groupie vibe. They're looking to date or seduce someone who might be able to give them the lifestyle they'd like to become accustomed to. But that wasn't the case with Nia. She was shy and soft-spoken but clearly confident and independent. I was a week away from getting married and I knew I wanted to get to know Nia better. I knew it was wrong. But hours after I introduced myself to her, Nia and I were still talking. About everything. Music, life, relationships, family. We had so much in common. It scared me. After my session was over, we ended up at a diner together. Still talking. You realize we have something here, I told Nia. She smiled and shook her head. I don't date industry types. Not anymore. Y'all are players. I protested. You can't lump us all together. We're all different. Nia put her fork down and clasped both of her hands together. Oh yeah? She asked. Do you have a girlfriend? Quote. I sputtered and tried to think of how to answer, repeating the question to buy time. Do I have a girlfriend? Quote. She wasn't having it. Oh, you heard the question. Tim, do you have a girlfriend? I thought about the wedding in a week. Maybe all of my jitters weren't just pre-wedding butterflies. Maybe I knew I was going to meet my soulmate and maybe I knew that Angela wasn't her. I don't just have a girlfriend. I began to explain. Nia stood up. A wife? We're done here. No, I said, putting my hand on her shoulder and gesturing that she should sit down and hear me out. I'm not married, but I'm engaged to get married. I knew it, she said, reaching for her purse. Players. Every last one of you. Bye, Timothy. It really was nice talking to you. The next day I went back home to Virginia and told Angela that I thought we should see our pastor. Again before the wedding. Why do you want to see the pastor? She asked. She had a book with all of the wedding details in it. She was fiddling with the seating arrangements and I could tell that she was more annoyed at being interrupted than anything else. Why not see him? I asked. That's what he's there for, right? Counseling. Angela looked up from her book. But we did the premarital counseling that the church recommended. I tried not to sound like something was wrong. So what? I'm recommending that we do a little more. I called the church and the pastor agreed to see us that afternoon. Angela had, over the course of a few short hours, worked herself into a frenzy. I didn't blame her. Our wedding was just days away. By the time he escorted us into his office, she was in tears. Angela, what's wrong? The pastor asked. Tim is not sure if he wants to marry me. The wedding is in 2 days and I'm devastated. Tim, is this true? This was my pastor. I had to be honest. Sir, I'm sorry, but I've been having doubts and I don't think it's just cold feet. I'm worried that Angela may not be the right match for me. What makes you say that? He asked. I held my stomach. My gut says something isn't right. The pastor looked concerned and Angela continued to sob. I couldn't even comfort her because I was the one who was breaking her heart. We left the pastor's office with no sense of resolution. But by the time we got home, I knew that I wasn't getting married that weekend. I just had to find the courage to tell her. Remember when Pharrell came and told me that he couldn't be in my band anymore? How he'd come and talk to me like a man and how much I'd respected him for it. This was a different situation. But it's the same principle. Now it was my turn to speak my truth and be honorable in my honesty. Angela, I'm sorry, I said. But we're not getting married this weekend. Her eyes widened and I could see her cycling back and forth between grief and rage. I thought about how back when I was a kid everyone called Al grits, green because a scorched lover had poured a pot of boiling hot grits on him when he was in the bathtub. I hoped that Angela would take the news better than that. Oh hell no, she screamed. What do you mean we're not getting married? You asked me to marry you. You gave me a ring. You said, I love you. I want to tell the world. I want you to be my wife. You led me on while I picked out china patterns and a big white dress. That now I want to shred and burn. I have family coming from all over the country this weekend. What am I supposed to say to them? Quote, put it all on me, baby, I said. Tell them I changed my mind. Don't call me baby, she said. And you can change your mind later after we have the wedding that everyone we know is expecting us to have. The moment she said that, I didn't care anymore. I'd waited too long. I hadn't handled it well. But I'd handled it. I'd rather cancel a wedding than claw my way through a divorce. I started to pack a bag and tried my best to block out the sound of Angela's tears. They reminded me so much of my mother's when my father had left her. Now there was a parallel track to that soundscape. Angela's wailing, tears that I had caused. I stood at the door and she stared at me in disbelief. As if she didn't expect me to leave. As if she thought we'd fight it out and then just go through with it. Where do you think you're going? She asked. New York, I said. I'll call my family and friends. Of course, I'll pay for everything. You damn well better, she hissed. Angela, I said, I'm sorry. Then she spoke very slowly and she said, don't you ever speak another word to me for the rest of my life. I wish I could say that I felt guilty, but as I bought a last-minute plane ticket and then boarded my flight, all I felt was relief. The first thing I did when I got to New York was call Nia. Aren't you supposed to be married or something? Nia asked as soon as she answered the phone. I didn't get married. I hope it wasn't because of me, she said. Because I barely know you. I told her it wasn't because of her, but I also told her that I wanted to get to know her better. It was hard convincing her, but over a few months, I finally convinced Nia to be my girlfriend. We dated for a few years. Years in which I grew up. A lot. But when people started talking marriage, I had the same sense of doubt. So Nia and I broke up. My friends always told me that when you meet your soulmate, you know in an instant. It's like all the years you spent running away from relationships are reversed because you don't want to just date her or sleep with her or hang with her until the early morning. You look at her and you know that's the face you want to wake up to for the rest of your life. You feel the call of forever and you have this desperation to lock it down before another guy makes a move and everything you dreamed about is lost gone. It sounded a little dramatic. But then it happened to me. It was my favorite kind of business trip. An island paradise. Panels during the day. Parties every night. When the team from Interscope asked if I wanted to attend a music conference in Jamaica, I didn't hesitate to say yes. And just to make sure that I didn't work too hard, I brought along my boys Magoo and Larry from Virginia Beach. I was standing with my boys in the lobby of the hotel when I saw her. It was like there was a light shining behind her. She lifted her head and I literally had to do a double take. Everything about her was beautiful. From her skin to her body to the way she carried herself. There's my wife, I told Magoo and Larry. What? They both guffawed. After all, they both had groomsmen tuxes in their closets from when I'd cancelled my nuptials to Angela just a few years before. I pointed her out. That's the woman I'm going to marry. Do you know her? Larry asked. I don't need to know her, I said. She's the one. Yo, someone tell her to come over here. Larry walked over to her and I could see him talking and pointing at me. I waved. She did not wave back. I saw her tell Larry something and from the look on her face, I didn't think I was going to like it. He grinned as he walked back over to me and Magoo. You got yourself a live one. Partner, he said. She wants you to know that if you would like to talk to her, you need to go over there and introduce yourself. I looked over and saw she was walking out of the hotel. All of a sudden, it was like my pride was on hold. I literally started jogging to catch up with her. Excuse me, I said. Yes? She said. Her voice was like butterscotch. Warm and smooth. I wanted to pinch myself. Even her voice was perfect. I'm Tim, I said, holding out my hand. Hi, Tim, I'm Monique. I apologized for sending Larry over. That wasn't cool, I said. No, it wasn't, she said. Then she smiled. But you're forgiven. We stood out in front of the hotel talking for a few minutes. Then I cut to the chase. Are you seeing anyone? I asked. Not right now, she said. Why? I'd like to take you out, I said. Tonight? No. Thank you, she said. I already have plans tonight. I wouldn't be put off. Could I at least call you? Quote, sure. We exchanged numbers and I went back to my friends. When are you going out with her? Magoo asked. I don't know, I said. But take a good look. That's my wife. When I returned to the States, Monique and I talked quite a bit on the phone. I was splitting my time between Virginia and Miami. She was living in Atlanta. I kept asking her to let me fly her to Miami for a visit. But she kept resisting. I respected that, but I really wanted to see her. So I kept calling. Then disaster struck and all of a sudden, I wasn't thinking about relationships at all. 16. A face I can't forget. August 25th, 2001. It started out like any other morning. I woke up and reached for the remote. I turned on the television and flipped through the channels absent-mindedly. I was about to switch to the next channel when I heard her name. Aaliyah. I paused. On screen, there was an aerial view of a plane. Its nose smashed and fragmented in a wooded area. Underneath the shot was a caption. Singer Aaliyah dies in a plane crash in Bahamas. I dropped the remote. I'm not sure what I hoped to accomplish by standing. But I made the attempt. My knees buckled underneath me and I fell to the floor sobbing. Not baby girl. Couldn't be. I was still lying on the floor, paralyzed with shock, anger and sadness. When Missy called, she was in Jamaica for a show and her phone was blowing up. It's a mistake, right, Tim? She asked plaintively. I didn't want to say it was true. Maybe it wasn't true, but something inside of me couldn't pretend. I felt the loss of her presence on earth the same way I could feel thirst or hunger. So I talked around it to Missy. I said, she was only 22, Missy. Tim. It's not real, Missy said. People are saying we were on that plane. It's all rumors and conjecture. This is not the time for gossip and bullshit. I'm not trying to hear it. I took a deep breath. Missy, please listen to me. Baby girl is gone. She died in that plane crash. Turn on the news. It's everywhere. There was silence, but I could tell she was following my instructions. Walking into a room with a TV. Turning on the news. Then, after what seemed like forever, Missy started screaming. She was moaning, shrieking and screaming so loud that I was afraid she might have a heart attack or worse. When she was done crying, I spoke to the team that was on the ground with Missy. And I prayed. Missy was going to have to get on a plane and come home. I needed her flight to travel safely. With God's mercy, I couldn't lose my whole family in one fell swoop. I lay on the floor and tried to wrap myself in memories of the good times. The time Missy and I all dressed up in the same outfit for an awards show. All the videos we did together. The studio sessions where we had impromptu dance parties and laughing fits about nothing at all. Laughing so hard we could barely get any work done. I thought about the dinners out when we celebrated every #1 record. If we'd known our time together was destined to be short, I don't think we'd have done it any differently. No need for us to try again. We made music. We made each other happy. The three of us, Aaliyah, Missy and I, were like kids in a musical relay race. We passed the baton back and forth and together we went further and faster than any of us knew we could go. Aaliyah's self-titled third album had been released in mid-July, just a month before she died. It debuted at #2 on the Billboard 200 and Hot R&B, Hip-Hop and quickly went to gold. When she died, stores couldn't keep the album on shelves. After her death, she was nominated for a Grammy for Best R&B Album and Rolling Stone named it the Best R&B Album of the Year. All of the praise was more bitter than sweet. A lot of love went into that record. And over 2 million people in the US and more than 13 million people worldwide received that love, took it home and made it part of the soundscape of their lives. I'd watched Aaliyah grow up making that record, seen her make strides from song to song. I wanted her to be there to feel all of that love. I wanted to tell her face to face how proud I was of her. I wanted her to be around. My arm, the one that still had a bullet lodged inside, started hurting again. The pain was always on and off over the years. But after her death, it was a constant ache. It was as if my arm carried the pain for my heart. I eat when I'm stressed. And I started consuming gluttonous amounts of food. Whenever I passed a mirror, I had to look away. Because while I'd never been thin, my body was expanding in ways that I'd never known. It seemed like my every waking moment consisted solely of one of three activities: eating, drinking, or crying. My mother kept urging me to go to church, to turn to God, who had carried me so far and through so much. They say there's a reason for everything. But Aaliyah's death made me question my faith in ways that frightened me. I felt like God had forsaken me. I feared that God wasn't real, that he was a construct I had clung to because of the lessons of my childhood rather than something that was living and real. Because there was no reason why Aaliyah should have died in such a senseless accident. There was no greater good, no lesson learned, just heartache and pain for her fans, and for the friends and family of everyone who had been on that plane. So I didn't open my Bible. I no longer prayed as soon as I opened my eyes. Instead I drank, as early as seemed socially acceptable. Then I drank until the finish. To pass out, until I slipped into a stupor and I could forget the tragedy that life had wrought. Alone in my house, without a girlfriend or wife, I kept the shades drawn and banned all guests. I gave up on grooming myself. Long days went by without shaves or showers. It was a good day when I bothered to brush my teeth. What was the point? I had enough money in the bank to never have to go anywhere again. I no longer had to dive for scraps of leftover pizza or scrape a plate of discarded Chinese food. I didn't have to sing, or make beats, for my supper anymore. It was Groundhog Day. Every day was the same as the one that preceded it. Even as I ate and drank myself into forgetfulness. It was like watching the news again. Seeing the airplane in pieces. All the wreckage. My mother called and called. Most of the time I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't bear to have her hear me slurring my words. Couldn't let her talk to me in the state I was in. When I did pick up, my mother urged me to get back into the studio. "Tim, if you want to be happy, you have to do the thing that makes you happy," she would say. Make some music. It was like she didn't get it. When God silenced Aaliyah's voice, he had silenced me too. "I don't want to make music, Ma," I said. Then she took a sterner tone. "Killing yourself won't bring her back, baby." I didn't answer. Didn't want to say how often that very thought, killing myself, had crossed my mind. "Tim, are you there?" I grunted. "This is your crossroads, my son," my mother said. "The Lord does not give us more than we can bear." Was she kidding? I had begun thinking about the car accident that had killed Devontae's girlfriend Dana. I had used the Bible, my faith in God, to mourn that loss and put it to bed. I still thought of her every winter, when the ground was covered with snow, and I remembered how we had driven just a few yards when the car spun and spun, out of control. Her death was a terrible loss. But I understood enough about the world to know that in the balance between nature and man, there were forces we could not control. The loss of Aaliyah Dana Houghton was another matter entirely. I never called her Dana, but as I read obit after obit, watched news reports and read the paper, her middle name echoed in death in ways that it had never echoed in life. It hurt me to hear her referred to as a distant, past tense person. I wanted to scream at every reporter. She is not talented R&B singer Aaliyah Dana Houghton, who died tragically in a plane crash. She will always be, baby girl, my sister, my friend, the girl who called me teddy bear, because she knew that appealing to my soft side would keep me in the studio all night. Had I known how it would end, I would still choose to work with baby girl a million times over. It's like Nick Cage says in that old movie Moonstruck. We aren't here to make things perfect. We are here to ruin ourselves and to break our hearts and to love the wrong people and die. I didn't want to make beats. Couldn't really. I would go into my home studio and sit. It felt like my ears didn't work. The music of daily life hid itself from me. Footsteps were just footsteps and running water was simply running water. There were still artists on my new label, Beat Club, that I had to think about. Jimmy Iovine at Interscope Records had so graciously offered me the chance to sign my own artists and produce my own records with all the creative freedom that I could imagine. I had, in quick succession, signed 3 acts who I believed in. There was Bubba Sparxxx, a rapper with a country twang from Georgia. Bubba was white, and even though hip-hop had been a largely African-American terrain, I thought that Bubba had the chops to fit in as more than a novelty act. Then there was Ms. Jade, a female rapper from Philadelphia who was very talented. She had a tight flow and I really believed in her lyrical expertise. The third artist was a soulful singer from a small town in Arkansas named Kylie Dean. Her parents had moved to Orlando and she had already begun making a name for herself with high-profile singing gigs, like singing backup for Britney Spears on her world tour. Kylie's voice was powerful and soulful and I had very big plans for her. Most of the studio work on those albums was done. Bubba's album was set to come out. Jade's was on the horizon. Kylie Dean's album was done and our team was preparing to release her first single. For the artists on my label, I had a responsibility to put 100% into their projects. I could have banged out some new tracks for them or tightened up some of the songs they were preparing to release. But now I would sit at my mixing board and not be able to come up with anything new. Or I would listen to some of the Aaliyah records we'd made that didn't make the album. All the goofy Super Friends tracks we had made for our own amusement. Every single song, no matter how silly, left me heaving with tears. It couldn't be true, but it was true. Baby girl was gone. Damn. The phone stopped ringing as much. Mostly because I rarely answered and never called anyone back. I didn't listen to the radio much. I was happy for my friend and brother Pharrell. He and Chad were producing powerhouses and I loved the work they did on NSYNC's Girlfriend, Usher's You Don't Have to Call, and Fabulous's Youngin'. Holla back. Yet sometimes when I listened to his songs, it hurt. I wondered if I would ever produce music that was so pure and joyful again. Missy kept urging me to get back in the studio, pour the pain onto a track and make some music that Aaliyah would be proud of. You working on anything? She asked. Yeah, here and there, I'd say. Lying. As soon as we were off the phone, it was back to my other companion. A bottle. Any bottle. A plate of food. Any food. A few months after Aaliyah's death, Jimmy Iovine called me in for a meeting. I cleaned myself up, got on a plane and went. I had hoped that my label could survive without me, that somehow the industry would give me time to mourn and heal. But that's not the way it works. At first, I thought my instincts had been off. Jimmy seemed happy to see me and as we exchanged hellos, I had this fleeting thought that I had just been paranoid. I had made the record company millions. They would understand that I'd hit a rough spot. But the moment I sat down, something in the room shifted. My gut had been right. Things weren't good. Jimmy began. I don't know anyone who works harder than you. And I know you believe in your artists. But Beat Club is just not working. Even though I was going through some things, I didn't want my heartache to hurt my artists. And I told him so. Look, I know I've dropped the ball, I said. We just need to formulate a plan and strike harder the next time. Jimmy shook his head. I can't afford a next time. Tim, we have to dissolve Beat Club now. I'm sorry. Believe me, I am. I know how much it means to you. But this is a business and we're losing money on the imprint. And nothing I've done in the past can convince you to give us a little more time? I asked. Afraid not, Tim, he said. I rose from my seat, shook his hand and walked out. Now I had some very difficult phone calls to make. It was just weeks after September 11th and it was a hard time to push party music. Bubba's album, Dark Days, Bright Nights, was released just 3 weeks after the terrorist attacks. Still, it peaked at number 3 and eventually achieved gold status. 500,000 copies sold was not nothing. But that's how punishing this business is. Jade's album was released a year later. November 2002. We believed in the project and I did all but 2 of the tracks. I was so happy to be able to bring in Pharrell's production team, the Neptunes, to do work on the album as well. We lined up guest spots from Missy, Nelly Furtado and Jay-Z. Still, the people were just not feeling it. Jade is so talented, but I believe she was a victim of the sexism in the music industry. It's like there's some unspoken rule that there can only be one big female rapper in the game at a time. It was like the Lauryn Hill line. 2 MCs can't occupy the same space at the same time. It's against the law of physics. This is how it was for Jade. Try as hard as we did. It just wasn't her turn. Kylie Dean's album was shelved completely. Interscope didn't feel like we had a strong enough first single and the reception of the songs we put out underground wasn't strong enough. Every rejection felt like a personal failing. I was such a long way from the Da Basement days and yet I felt like somehow I'd gone crashing back to those times when I was scrambling for food and scrambling even harder to catch a break. As the founder of Beat Club Records, I had a responsibility to these artists. Their hopes, dreams and careers were dependent on what I could make happen for them. I had no beef with Jimmy Iovine. He was an executive. He had a responsibility to make sure that the profit margins were strong. Or it was his ass on the line with Universal Records. It was like Bob Dylan sang, "You might be a rock and roll addict prancing on the stage. You might have drugs at your command, women in a cage. You may be a businessman or some high-degree thief. They may call you doctor or they may call you chief. But you're gonna have to serve somebody, yes indeed. You're gonna have to serve somebody. Well, it may be the devil or it may be the Lord. But you're gonna have to serve somebody." I wasn't feeling confident or healthy. But after Beat Club folded, I knew I couldn't afford to sit around the house feeling sorry for myself. So I went back to work. I dragged myself into the studio each day. But I couldn't make the magic happen. I didn't like any of the beats I was making. I felt like a musician who'd forgotten how to play the instrument that had been his life. Even my mixing board, which had once been an extension of my own 2 hands, started to look weird to me. Sometimes, I'd look down at the board and I felt like I was on a bad trip. The lights and the knobs looked like cartoony, sad faces. I still talked to Monique, the beautiful girl I'd met in Jamaica. I don't know if it was the circumstances of my life, but I think I was at a point where everything was so real and so raw that she could see who I was. Timothy, the man, as opposed to Timbaland, the artist. She finally agreed to come see me in Miami. I was so excited, but I think I was also a little scared. Because when her flight arrived from Atlanta, I was shopping for sneakers at the local mall. Instead of going to pick her up at the airport, I sent one of my boys to get her. When I got back to the house, 2 hours after her flight had landed, my friend Larry was sitting alone in my house. "Where is she?" I asked. "She left," he said. I was shocked. "She sat right here. Called the airline and booked her return flight back home." She said you must not have been serious about seeing her if you made her wait so long. Believe it or not, I had the nerve to be mad. I'd paid for her flight. I'd planned a whole romantic weekend. I started sputtering and talking like I was some badass Don Juan who'd been stood up. Then I realized, I wasn't mad at her. I was mad at myself. Why did I assume that she was like other women that I'd fooled around with? Those women would have waited even longer to see me. They let me get away with anything because they thought that was the only way to get me to give them the things they wanted. Monique was different. She was her own woman. She made her own money. And she made it abundantly clear whenever we talked that she wanted my conversation and my company. Anything else was just the icing on the cake. She once explained it by saying, "I'm not the type of chick to eat frosting out of a jar. There's got to be the cake. I need the substance of something real." I should have reached out to her right away and apologized. But I was so embarrassed. I felt so exposed that instead I kept my distance. Picked up the phone 100 times. And 100 times. Put it right back down again. Luckily, work started to pick back up again and I had something to distract me. Jay-Z called and said he was looking for beats for the Black Album. His farewell CD. I knew I had to get a track placed on that album. From the beginning, I knew that project would go down not just as a cornerstone of hip-hop, but as an iconic moment in pop music. On the day he came by the studio to hear the beats, I was prepared. I pulled on some clothes, not really caring how I looked, and grabbed a gallon jug of juice from the studio fridge. I could tell that Jay was surprised at how much my appearance had changed. I had always been husky, but my weight ballooned after Aaliyah's death, and at that point, I didn't really care. After we shook hands and said our hellos, Jay and I got right down to business. "You don't have any choice but to like this beat, Jay," I said. I bobbed my head furiously as I played him track after track. He sat next to me and listened. Just knowing he was coming had inspired me in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time. But nothing I played really grabbed him. An artist like Jay-Z knows exactly what he wants and how to get it. If he's not feeling your beats, you're out of luck. For someone like him, it's not about friendship and it's not even about what'll sell. He's got to feel it in his soul or he's not buying. I played him 5 tracks in all and then he said, "You got anything with a little bit of bounce to it?" Quote. He smiled, as if he was challenging me. My other tracks were hot. I knew that, but he wanted something that only he could flow over. Something more complex. Luckily, I had a track that I had been holding back for precisely this purpose. "Cue it up," I told the engineer. Then I rolled my eyes at Jay. "Do I have something with a little bounce? You better sit back from the board." Then I cranked the beats for what would become Dirt Off Your Shoulder. Jay just about lost his mind. He started bouncing around the studio, nodding his head so hard I thought he might break his neck. When I crafted that beat, I was trying to capture the energy of a high school marching band, all outfitted with electronic instruments. The bass was unrelenting on that song, and I wanted to capture some of what I thought made Jay so special. From the Marcy Projects to the highest echelons of American culture, he had been relentless in his creativity. Still, Jay didn't come out and say he was choosing my song for his album. He liked to play things close to his vest, so all I could do was thank him for his time and wish him the best. Missy was ready to start working on her next album. Ironically, she called the album "This Is Not a Test," because the truth is that album was a test of our friendship. I love that girl more than I love my life. But Missy drove me crazy making that album. Crazy. We had a million little arguments and our longtime engineer, Jimmy Douglas, the same guy who'd helped me save my masters from Devontae's basement when I was just a scrub producer trying to get put on, had to mediate more than a few times. It started almost as soon as we began recording. As always, I had lots of tracks queued up for her. Usually, she would hear a beat, find a melody and write lyrics in a day. At the most we were so in sync that we'd done her debut album, Supa Dupa Fly, in 2 weeks flat. This time around, Missy was not feeling me. I'm not in love with that track, she said when I played the first one I'd composed specially for her. She didn't like tracks 2 through 10 either. I was surprised but not daunted. I was back in the swing of things and I had beats for days. Okay, I said. What about this one? It's so Missy. I played the next track and waited for her response. She said. I looked at her. Did you just say, again? She looked at me, disappointed. I'm sorry, Tim. I'm just not feeling that one. I took a deep breath. Missy, I said, I got people fighting to buy that track. She shrugged. So sell it. Let me hear something else. Anybody else? I would have cut the session short and wished them good luck with their project while I showed them the door. But this was Missy. We didn't just have history. She was my history. So I kept it. Looking back, I think we weren't at the best place to work together. The fact that Missy couldn't find a beat she liked from my whole collection was a sign of that. We were both still mourning Aaliyah and I think we were trying to figure out how to go back to being just the two of us when we had created something so unique as a trio. Missy ran her hands over the keyboard randomly. I like the way that sounded, she said with a smile. Let's make a beat based on that. I just glared at her. Oh come on, she said. Lighten up. Play me some more beats. I played another 10 tracks. She didn't like any of them. Maybe we should try again tomorrow, I finally said. Okay, I'll be back, Missy said cheerily. Either she didn't notice how mad I was or she was pretending not to notice. The next day, I made up a reason why we couldn't meet at the studio. The day after that, I told Missy I had a session booked with another artist. I avoided her for a whole week. Because like Erykah Badu said, I'm an artist and I'm sensitive about my shit. Nobody in the world knew me like Missy Elliott. But when she turned her nose up at my beats, I was hurt. When's Missy coming back to the studio? Jimmy asked me that weekend. Don't know, don't care, I said. Jimmy is the one who showed me that I needed to squash it. Tim, you're a perfectionist, he said. We know that she's a perfectionist too. That's what makes you great together. Y'all love each other too much to play little games like this. Get over it and get back to work. Jimmy was right. I called Missy and we got to work right away. I realized that as Missy grew as an artist, she wanted to play a bigger role in the producing end. She co-produced 2 of my favorite tracks on that album. Wake Up, which featured a rhyme from Jay-Z, and Keep It Movin', a song that we brought reggae superstar Elephant Man in on. By the time Missy and I finished her album, we were both happy with the way her body of work was growing. That the album went platinum was just the icing on the cake. 17. Try Again. In the summer of 2003, I hit hard with Dirt Off Your Shoulder, the track I produced for Jay-Z. It was picked as the second single and charted well. Everyone was walking around pantomiming the act of brushing imaginary dirt off their shoulders. After the video dropped, and a few years later, when Barack Obama was in the lowest days of his historic bid for the presidency, he responded to the petty campaign politics not with words, but by symbolically brushing dirt off of his shoulders. When reporters asked his aides if Obama was specifically referencing our song, the campaign replied and said, well, he does have some Jay-Z on his iPod. Epic moment. I was happy and honored to be part of another hit record for Jay. But I didn't take a second of it for granted. The song could just as easily have not been chosen to be on the album. It didn't have to be a single. It didn't have to be a hit song. I had been blessed all around and I was present enough and grounded enough to know it. Maybe because I had my swagger on from the Jay song. I'd summoned the courage to call Monique and apologize for the way I'd messed up when she came to Miami. She still wasn't trying to date me, but we talked on the phone for hours on end, and little by little, we were becoming friends. While working on a single is always fun, there's really nothing like working with an artist from start to finish on a project. When you do an album, as opposed to a single, it's like making a movie versus making a television commercial. As a producer, you're like a director. You have a vision and you can carry it through from start to finish. Which is why I was thrilled when I had the opportunity to be the lead producer on a project for Brandy's fourth album, Aphrodisiac. She had been one of my favorite singers for years and years. I call her by the name of her hip-hop alter ego, Brand New. When she came into the studio, I started by asking her, "What are you looking for this time around?" Quote, "A lot of the artists I work with want and need time to talk through their ideas. They might not be able to play an instrument or write music, but I talk to them about what's been going on in their lives, how they're feeling at the moment. As they talk, I start mentally making a stockpile of sounds, the same way that a painter might start mixing colors in a palette." Brandy let me know she was ready for something new. She came in with the title Aphrodisiac, and that play on words let me know she was freeing herself from her good girl image. She wanted to take chances, embrace her sexuality, and let the world get to know her as a fully formed woman. We began recording at the end of 2003, and I felt like I was getting the best she had to offer on each and every track. Later, when Rihanna was making her debut, she cited Aphrodisiac as a major influence. Brandy's album Aphrodisiac really helped to inspire me, because that album I listened to all day, all night. When I was in the studio, that was the album that I listened to all the time. Rihanna told Entertainment Weekly, "I really admired that every song was a great song." Nate Dogg, an artist who became known for his work with Snoop's Dogg Pound, approached me about producing some tracks for his upcoming album. I created 3 tracks and put Jade on 2 of them. Ms. Jade is still one of the hottest, dopest, most original female lyricists I know, and even though Beat Club had folded, I made sure to take care of her and keep her working. Jade stepped into the booth and started to spit her lines. "Hustle for rings, give me the chains. Oops, my Betty ain't part of the game, I got friends in the front. Hoes in the back." Nate Dogg in the Black Timbaland on the track. Bubba Sparks, Petty Pab, and Sebast in the back. Jade writes her own rhymes and she has a flow that is just sick. And when she's recording, she puts her whole body into her delivery. Nate listened to the track and hit me up. "Yo, your girl Jade is the truth," he said. "I know," I said, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. "It wouldn't be hot without your beats," Nate said. I thanked him, and then he said, "Look, I know it's been tough for you and Missy since baby girl passed away." I looked down and didn't say a word. "But I really respect that y'all are still hustling. She would not have wanted you to be holed up in some dungeon, depressed and shit." Sometimes in hip-hop, male artists can put up a wall. You talk about everything, but really you aren't saying anything. I appreciated the fact that Nate had reached out and really said something to me about our loss. He had soul. It wasn't just in his music. It was also in his heart. The next track I worked on remains one of my all-time favorites. The artist was a girl from Harlem named Khalees. I'd known her for some time. I remembered years ago, when she was recording her first album with Pharrell, I came into the studio and heard someone screaming, "I hate you so much right now," at the top of her lungs. There was something so artistic and just plain dope about it. The song she was working on would go on to be a major hit for her and Pharrell. It was just so different. The chorus was a woman literally screaming at her man, and her style of singing, deep and throaty, was such a departure from what was on the radio at the time. I filed Khalees away as an artist that I hope to work with in the future. I knew she was eccentric enough to get my beats and I loved her brash, in-your-face charm. I got my chance just a few weeks after finishing the Nate Dogg track with Ms. Jade. My song with Khalees was called Running Mate, and it was a bass-heavy, electronica-influenced jam about wanting someone who would always be by your side, who would hold you down and lift you up. Writing that song made me realize how much I was missing having a running mate. I started to feel social for the first time in months. My boys and I started going out after our studio sessions and I began to date again. One night, I was getting ready for a date when my phone rang. "Hey, Tim. It's Monique," said the familiar sultry voice on the other end of the line. "Hey, how are you?" I asked. "I'm good," she said. "Just checking up on you. What are you up to?" I smiled. "Actually, I'm getting ready for a date. You jealous?" "Please," Monique laughed. "She's not me, so it doesn't really matter." I loved her confidence. "You're right," I said. "She's no you. Have fun on your date." "I'll talk to you soon," Monique said before hanging up. My date was okay, but the fact is that I was always thinking about Monique. But I was also always thinking about my career. I was happy to be making music again. But while my songs were going gold and platinum, I didn't have the runaway, chart-topping, genre-shaping success I'd had when Missy and I worked with Aaliyah. Like Nick Hornby wrote in his novel A Long Way Down, hard is trying to rebuild yourself, piece by piece, with no instruction book, and no clue as to where all the important bits are supposed to go. 19. My brother from another mother. From the moment Jimmy Iovine hooked me up with Justin Timberlake, we clicked. He's from Tennessee, I'm from Virginia, and immediately we bonded over being from the South. It reminded me of the immediate connection I'd felt with Missy and, later, Aaliyah. With some people, you just know the bond is there immediately. That's the way it was with Justin. He walked into the studio like a true professional. On time. No drama. No entourage. Ready to work. Somehow, in between cranking out songs together, we ended up talking. In addition to both being from the South, we also have similar soulful tastes in music. I ended up having a lot more in common with him than I ever thought I would. I mean, he was a pop idol from a super successful pop band, NSYNC. He was a blonde white boy who had legions of fans in the MTV TRL world. We had lots in common. But on the surface, it seemed like we had nothing in common. I hadn't had much experience working outside the R&B and hip-hop world. And working with Justin Timberlake was a true departure. That said, I always want to work with artists outside of my comfort zone. My intention is to do it all. From classical and opera to funk, pop, rock and hip-hop. Yet there were whispers from within the industry. Timbaland sold out. Timbaland thinks he's too good for hip-hop. It made no sense to me then and makes no sense to me now. I'm all about growth. I'm all about doing what makes you happy. When Jimmy Iovine gave me the opportunity to work with Justin, what was I supposed to say? No thanks? I only work with hip-hop and R&B artists? That's crazy. Cry Me a River was born out of the end of Justin's relationship with Britney Spears. There had been some talk that she'd been saying some slick things about him on stage at her shows. And he wanted to respond. He walked into the studio and I could see that he was visibly angry. But he wanted to work. I was beatboxing the song at first and Justin said, "It sounded like a march to me. It matched the way I felt." Justin began singing, just whatever was in his heart. "You were my sun. You were my earth." It was one of those synergistic, serendipitous moments. The track begins with the sound of rain. But for me it was a totally different rain than what you hear in Supa Dupa Fly. I added a male voice that sounded like a monk reciting a Gregorian chant. For me, it added that element of timelessness. Because what is more ancient and universal than a broken heart? The beat drops and then it's just Justin's voice finding its way through all the layers of strings and percussion. As we continued to work on the song, we added elements. The sound of knuckles being cracked, a man's voice shushing someone, and other pieces that gave it an almost soundtrack-like feel. Like Jay-Z, Justin wrote the lyrics entirely in his head. He came into the studio, listened to my track, and then laid his lyrics down in practically one take. I remember thinking, this boy is the truth. That's when I knew we had magic. And honestly, I hadn't had that kind of magic in the studio since working with Aaliyah. Cry Me a River ended up being a monster hit for Justin, charting at #1 and winning him a Grammy. The album Justified ended up triple platinum in the US with over 7 million in sales nationwide. It was on and popping. We spent 3 years touring with that album. We all enjoyed that success. But the money that we made and the awards that we won paled in comparison to the fun we had in the studio. Working with Justin on his debut solo album was the beginning of a collaborative relationship that I believe will last as long as I'm alive and making music. Have you ever been haunted by a dream? I nodded, although I didn't want to waste our valuable studio time by explaining the horrible dreams I suffered after Aaliyah's death. The way that sometimes it feels like I'm haunted by musical spirits. There are times when I just want to turn the music in my head off. But I can't. I think that's why drugs and alcohol remain such a stalwart part of our landscape in the music business. It's not because we party so hard, though we do, sometimes. I think it's more that we feel things so close to the bone. The sounds and the music are with us constantly, and sometimes we just want to turn it all off. It's like that Rudimental song. I drink a little more than recommended. This world ain't exactly what my heart expected. Trying to find my way some way. Oh I. Hey, Tim, she said. It's Carrie Hilson. What's up? Polo wants me to sing for you. Over the phone? Yup, over the phone. If you like what you hear, maybe you can come down to Atlanta and hear what else I've been working on in the studio. I liked her gumption. It reminded me of Missy and her girls waiting for Jodeci so she could sing for Devante. Well, I said, let's hear what you've got. I really wish I could remember what Carrie sang for me on the phone. All I know is that I was ready to jump on a plane or get on my tour bus to see what she could do in person. She had the perfect sound for a pop R&B star. It was light, not aggressive. She was forceful but not over the top. Honestly, her voice reminded me a little bit of Aaliyah. As soon as I heard her voice, I knew I was going to Atlanta and that one day, I was going to work with her. It took a couple of years. But one of the first acts I signed to the Mosley Music Group was Carrie. At just 22 years old, Carrie was a founding member of an Atlanta-based songwriting collective called The Clutch. Together with her songwriting team, she'd already written a handful of hit songs for great artists. Take Me As I Am by Mary J. Blige, Icebox by Omarion, and Break the Ice by Britney Spears. I had put Carrie on a few tracks myself, trying out her sound and using her voice to bolster the tracks I was working on. Carrie proved early on that she was a hard worker. When I asked her to come to the studio, she was there. Her experience as a songwriter helped her to create unique hooks and background vocals as well. One of the first tracks I put her on was an underground hip-hop classic called Hey Now, Mean Muggin' by Exhibit. The beat was high energy and unrelenting with the sounds of finger snaps throughout. It was like a basement party that went till morning because everyone was dancing so hard and having so much fun that nobody noticed the sun was coming up. Carrie found just the right tone and groove to go with Exhibit's flow, and in the video she brought her beautiful street smart but still glamorous tomboy energy, which complemented the mood of the song perfectly. It was obvious that she had star quality and star power. I was happy to play a role in her transition from songwriter to singer. After the exhibit cut, I put her on a song called Let Me Love You on Chingy's album Hoodstar. This track was ultra fast and Carrie used her voice at a higher register, showing her vocal diversity. I always like to work with a singer who can bring range to the table. I used a lot of hi-hats and whistle sounds to add to the ethereal, almost Space Jam-like mood of the song. Day in and day out, I kept telling anyone who would listen that Carrie Hilson was the joint, that they just needed to hear her voice. We were both thrilled when Diddy agreed to make Carrie the featured vocalist on a track called After Love on his Press Play album. Carrie was still so young, but you could hear her growth. Track after track, she was bringing elements of Gladys Knight, elements of Diana Ross, a little bit of Sade, and yet each and every time, she sounded wholly and uniquely like herself. We were still a couple of years away from releasing her solo album, but landing those feature spots on songs with established artists is the best way to release a new artist, from hearing her on the radio to seeing her in music videos. The public was starting to wonder, damn, who's that girl? And creatively, Carrie was learning and growing from the experience of working with a wide range of established heavy hitters who all brought something different to the table. I also did a remix for Beyoncé's song, Get Me Bodied, which was really fun. I love working on a remix because it takes me straight back to those high school days when I was DJ Tim, learning how to spin tracks at community center parties. I loved Beyoncé's energy in the song and the I'm gonna do me vibe in her lyrics. I ain't worried doing me tonight. A little sweat ain't never hurt nobody. While you all standin' on the wall, I'm the one tonight. Getting back in the groove of producing was inspiring. I started playing around with the idea of an album of my own. I had done solo albums before, with varying degrees of success, but it had been a long time and there's always the fear of failure. Producers aren't always successful when they try to go to the artist side. I just wanted to produce an entire album on my own and invite a mix of artists, some known, some not so well known, to my musical party. After mulling over the idea for a few weeks, I decided to go for it. I knew right away that I wanted Nelly Furtado, Justin Timberlake, Jay-Z, and Carrie Hilson on the album. The final roundup for what we called Timbaland Presents Shock Value ended up living up to its name. Timbaland's rules for collaboration. Many people think that the music business is so unlike any industry that its rules just don't apply to any other business. I disagree. Business is business. And whether you're at Apple, designing the next iPhone, or you're at an advertising agency in Kansas City, coming up with a new marketing campaign for a client, or you're in Miami, opening a brand new hotel, creative collaboration is what's going to take you to the top and keep you there. These are my rules for creative collaboration. When, not if. From the moment I met Missy Elliott, she has been an unyielding fountain of optimism. She always believed that we would get a record deal, that we would achieve all of our goals creatively and professionally. And she never wavered. Now, let me be clear, Missy did more than hope. She worked her ass off. We both did. There's an African proverb that says one must move one's feet while one prays. Whether you're creating with just one team member or dozens, make sure you're all on the same page. Does everyone believe in the project with as much heart and soul as you do? And the next question is everyone willing to work day and night to make what is only a dream come true? If that's the case, then there's no telling what you can accomplish. Pay your dues, but don't be used. I stayed too long in the world of Devontae's Da Basement Crew, but I paid my dues. When you're assessing your own experience, ask yourself, how can I beef up in this one particular area, in a way that makes me grow but doesn't make me feel used? Every team needs an experienced industry vet with heart and a talented rookie willing to take a risk. For us, early on, our industry vet was Jimmy Douglas. the in-house studio engineer at Da Basement, who helped me escape that situation and sign my first big deal. And of course, the talented rookie willing to take a risk was Aaliyah. Who do you have on your team and in your life who can play the same roles? Every great creative venture needs the weight of experience and the lift of someone who is young enough and green enough to do something totally new. Listen more than you talk, always. Some of the most important work I do with artists are the conversations we have before I lay down a single beat. I love to talk to creative people and hear what's going on in their lives. Are they in love or out of love? Do they have a favorite painting that moves them to tears, even though they don't know why? Did they read an article or is there a political issue that has them fired up? What were their favorite songs as a kid? What music did their parents listen to? I always do more listening than talking. And sometimes while they talk, I respond by tapping out beats with my hands. The same way that I did in high school. In school, the tapping got me in trouble. But in the studio, the artists understand that it's almost like I'm a talking drum. The beats I'm making are my way of responding. The response in a very traditional, almost tribal, call and response pattern. It's a natural thing to talk a lot and to speak quickly when you get nervous. But if you're going to create something original, if you're going to collaborate with another person or a group of people, then you have to stop talking. Put all the technology down and listen in a way that is deep enough and present enough that you make a connection. That connection is the foundation of the work you'll do together. And when there's magic in that connection, there's no limit to what you can do. The poet Nikki Giovanni once said, "Language is a gift, but listening is a responsibility. No experience is wasted. Bring your whole self into the room." You can hear my whole life in the songs that I've made. From the toys that I played with as a kid to the trials I went through as a young man to the people and places that make me the man I am. When I first started DJing, I developed that warp style of making beats, where I'd leave a record out in the sun and let it warp to give it a strange, distorted sound. That sound evolved into all of the futuristic beats that I created for artists like Missy, Justin, Madonna and Bjork. What have you learned on your creative journey? How can you carry a skill, a technique, an idea that brought you energy and joy into the work you're doing now? Study your successes and look for things that you can replicate. Know what makes you different and work it. Ever since we were high school kids making beats in my bedroom studio in the VA, Missy and I have always known what made us us. We never tried to pretend that we were anything besides goofy creative types who could have been art school students just as easily as we ended up being hip-hop artists. We love it all. Opera and electronica, rock and reggae, pop and jazz. You can hear us on every single track we produce. Even if we don't speak a word, we've always embraced what makes us different and we work it, on song after song, track after track. What's your creative DNA? What makes you uniquely and totally you? Respect your instrument. A lot of us let ourselves go when we're in the creative hunt. We work all night, we eat junk and drink too much. We don't sleep and we think, I'll do better when I'm successful. What I've learned over the years is that my best work comes when I'm taking the best care of myself that I can. Respect your instrument. Even if you're not a musician, your instrument is you. Like LL Cool J told me, get your health right, everything else will fall in place. Don't prejudge your collaborators. It's a mistake to judge a collaborator based upon superficial aspects like race or skin color. But it's also wrong to make the kind of judgments we do all the time about the way someone dresses, or the kind of work they've done before. If you're creative, you don't want to be put in a box. So don't put other people in a box either. If I'd dismissed Justin Timberlake as a boy band wunderkind, not only would we have never made the music we made together, I would have also missed out on the chance to develop one of the most powerful friendships I've ever known. Sure, do your research about people, Look for markers of talent and excellence. But if you find yourself assigned to a project with someone who, on the surface, seems to not be your type of person, give them a chance. You might be surprised to find that you can do great things together. And if nothing else, you'll grow in the process if you observe and learn from your differences. Use the whole box of crayons. Throughout my career, I've been deemed a hip-hop producer. But musically, I never put myself into the box of any single genre. My love of music from rock and electronica to world music and classic R&B has influenced my work. With a range of artists, including Missy, Justin and Nelly Furtado, there's not a business in the world that can't benefit from looking at what people are doing in other industries and other genres. If necessity is the mother of invention, and Lord knows, when I've needed to come up with a banging beat, I've done it. Then diversity is the papa of invention. Broaden the palette of colors at your disposal and you'll watch the creativity of your team soar. My last rule needs no description because it's straight from the mouth of my beloved baby sister. Aaliyah, try again. If at first you don't succeed, try again. About the author, Timbaland, born Timothy Z. Mosley, has played many creative roles throughout his celebrated career. He was a member of Devontae Swing's Da Basement Crew and is one half of the hip-hop duo Timbaland and Magoo, considered one of the most successful producers in music history. He is the executive music producer of Fox's runaway hit television show Emporer. The CEO of his own label, Mosley Music Group, Timbaland lives in Miami, Florida, with his wife and children.